11 is a conniving number. Wedged between two round, robust integers, it sits on the fringe of all that is balanced. It sneaks and schemes. It lurks and loiters. I only learnt of the number's limitless layers when I left a hotel room, numbered 11, at precisely 3 in the morning, right on the hour, minute, and second. The 11th door at the stroke of the 3rd hour. That sentence was sloppily scrawled on the beige wall opposite my room. I looked at my wristwatch. 3 o'clock. If the written message were a prank from another hotel guest, it would have been an eerily well-timed prank. How could anyone possibly have known I'd leave my room at that exact moment? I hadn't planned my exit. I was heading to the car because I'd forgotten my phone charger. The 11th door at the stroke of the 3rd hour. The odds of those variables aligning are astronomically slim. Nevertheless, it happened to me, and I have to assume it could happen to others. And if I happen to be mankind's first victim of this paranormal phenomenon, I hope to be the last. The hotel corridor was a liminal space, a threshold to a world subverting nature. The building's interior appeared ordinary on the surface, but something about the stark silence of the hallway irked me. I knew I didn't belong in that realm. I was a foreign body on the flesh of an unnatural host. I twisted my head left and squinted at the end of the hallway. It took a good minute to finally embrace the sickening truth. The hallway had no end. I turned to my right, another assaulting wave of nausea. There was a ceaseless corridor in either direction. Turning around to face my hotel room, I was at least partly relieved to see that it looked exactly the same. Hoping to latch onto the remaining semblance of normality, I stepped into number 11 and closed the door. After taking a quick glance at my wife and daughter, who both slept peacefully, I opened the door to the corridor again. I was praying for a different result, but the words were still there. The writings on the wall, I thought, not oblivious to the foreboding connotations. The corridor had not contracted to a finite length. I was still trapped in the dreadful alternate dimension. Are my wife and daughter trapped with me? I fearfully wondered. I re-entered the room and watched the two of them, lost in the land of dreams. But only I'd exited the 11th door at the stroke of the 3rd hour, and if the sign in the hallway could have been trusted, I would have hoped for my loved ones to be in the real dimension. But I didn't trust the sign. I didn't trust anything in the hotel. Not in the slightest. Unwilling to explore the petrifying place between worlds, having watched far too many horror films with reckless protagonists, I closed the door, undressed myself, and returned to bed. Adios, hallway to hell, I thought. Out of sight and out of mind. It's just a bad dream. I repeated that mantra tirelessly. Not so tirelessly that I couldn't eventually drift off, however. Evan, where's Malia? Sydney asked. My wife jostled me awake, and I turned to face every parent's nightmare. Malia's bed was empty. I looked at my wristwatch. 3 o'clock. Time was standing still. I bet it has something to do with that boy she's seeing, Sydney huffed, whilst pacing around the room. He's probably driven over here to pick her up. My foggy brain collected itself, and I attempted to ascertain whether I'd simply dreamt of the never-ending hotel corridor. Have you wrung her? I asked. Sydney shook her head, whilst the folds of her brow multiplied. I can't get any signal on my phone, and it's been 3 in the morning since I woke up. I must be losing it. I should just peek outside to see whether I can spot that boy in the car park. Marley is getting older, honey. She does what she wants, I said. This is our last holiday before she goes to university, Evan, Sydney replied, opening the curtains. She doesn't... My wife turned to stone. Slowly, but surely, she unleashed an awful ascending wail. Her entire body was trembling at the sight of the night sky before her. But it wasn't until I sat upright in bed that I saw what she saw. Not the night sky. A void. Eternal blackness. Evan? What's happening? Sydney whimpered. I slid from bed, clumsily slithering into my grey t-shirt and faded denim jeans. I could feel the colour draining from my face. I saw something, I said. I thought I'd been dreaming, but... Are we awake? Sydney pinched herself, and I followed suit. A brief pang of pain told me all I needed to know. My wife shivered. It seems pretty real to me. What did you see? I gulped, gathering my words. At 3 o'clock, which was hours ago, I left the room to fetch my phone charger. I was just going to put on an audiobook, something to help me sleep. Anyway, well, maybe I should show you. I opened the door to the corridor and quivered at the writing I had hoped I wouldn't see. My wife peered over my shoulder and gasped. Is somebody tormenting us? She asked. Look down the corridor, I whispered. I could only watch helplessly as my wife stepped into the hallway, screamed, and clutched the sides of her head. Then, suddenly, her face fell still. No, it's a trick. It has to be, she asserted. They've set up mirrors at either end of the corridor, and... No, I couldn't see my reflection. Screens? Digital screens? How do you explain the nothingness outside? I asked quietly. We should be able to see the car park. Sydney stormed back into the room, picked up her slipper, and walked over to the window. I followed her. She was presumably planning to throw her slipper outside. I prayed it would rip through a black canvas, revealing the car park beyond. You've been pranked, an irritating presenter would announce, emerging from the bathroom with a camera crew. That didn't happen. When Sydney opened the window, the colour drained from the room. Not just the colour, the light, the sound, and the matter. Swirling towards a black plug hole, Sydney and I watched our bodies whirl and stretch, much like everything else in room 11. We were being dragged into the absence beyond the window. Shut it! I yelled. Sydney braced herself against the window frame and the wall, wrestling with the unseen agent of darkness that sought to claim us. Miraculously, she managed to slam the window shut. The room returned to its rightful colour and elasticity. My wife and I collapsed onto the diamond-patterned carpet. We were sore, but our bodies were properly formed. It's not a trick of the light, I panted. I felt that. I felt the blackness pulling me towards it. Sydney started crying, so I crawled over to her. She lay in my arms, sobbing whilst I rocked her back and forth. Where's Malia? She bawled. Our teenage daughter hadn't gone outside, couldn't go outside, and only meant one thing. She was somewhere within the never-ending hotel. My wife suddenly wrenched herself from my body and ran to the open door. "I saw something out there," she said. I stood up and followed her out of the room. Sydney pointed at a spot on the carpet of the corridor. To the left of our open door, there was a trail of crisp crumbs. Sydney's eagle eyes astounded me. "Let's be thankful for Malia's early hour snacking," my wife said. She donned her golden cardigan and ripped jeans, joining me in the corridor a minute later. Sydney dumped a green coat on the hallway carpet, pointing out that it would be wise to leave a marker outside our room. She looked at the words on the wall as we turned left and began our hunt. "Do you think you opened a doorway to this place?" she asked. "I'm sorry," I said. "No, I just want to figure out how we're going to open a doorway out of here," Sydney said. As we proceeded to follow the trail of crisp crumbs down the beige hotel corridor, I found myself wondering the same thing. I also found myself slipping deeper into the throes of insanity. The never-ending corridor unscrewed the bolts of my mind. None of the other doors were numbered, and the environment was repeating itself ad infinitum. Eventually, of course, the crisp crumbs stopped. We were blindly searching for Malia. When something new appeared on the horizon, it renewed Sydney's energy, and she quickened the pace. I sprinted after her, and I slowly started to distinguish the shape of a vacuum cleaner in the corridor. Its squiggly cable disappeared into an ajar door on the left, and there was a growing sound. The vacuum was steadily buzzing away. A yellow post-it note clung to the abandoned machine. "Enjoy your stay. How would you like to pay?" Sydney read, shuddering. Before either of us could summon the bravery to follow the cable into the room, the ajar door started to squeak open of its own accord. Our eyes followed the curvy trail of the vacuum cleaner's power nozzle. There was a chambermaid kneeling on the floor, wriggling from side to side as she vacuumed. She was cleaning the carpet beside the bed, so we could only see her legs and part of her torso. "Where's my daughter?" Sydney firmly asked her. My wife had uttered the question before I had a chance to stop her. The chambermaid immediately stopped moving, and the vacuum cleaner switched off. The room plunged into silence. A horrifying sound, like a rusty tap handle twisting, emanated from the woman as she rose to her feet. Sydney and I screamed. The chambermaid had a body that was almost human, but some anatomical parts had been rendered incorrectly. She had 2 sets of arms which hung to the carpet, and her hair coated her entire head, seeping into the facial orifices that should have housed her eyes and mouth. My wife and I fled as the rusty, wheezing creature followed us down the long hotel corridor. We were putting distance between us and the chambermaid, but our stamina was dwindling. Sydney eventually swung to her right, fumbling with the door handle, and we both slipped into a darkened room. My wife hurriedly closed the door behind us. Cupping our panting mouths, we waited in the lightless space, hoping for the unearthly woman to either lose us or lose interest. Terror quickened my heartbeat as the chambermaid's abnormally quiet footsteps pattered past our hiding place. The creature continued down the corridor, but we didn't move until we couldn't hear her anymore. "What now?" Sydney whispered, crying. Before I could answer, a telephone rang in the darkness. Neither of us moved. The sound was stemming from the shadows of the room. And before either of us had the courage to search for the phone, A voicemail played.
I managed to sneak out. Mum and Dad haven't noticed, but something really freaky is happening in this hotel, Nick. I keep getting lost. It's huge. My voice note should send when I finally get some phone signal. As soon as you hear it, please come and pick me up. Love you. Bye.
The crackly voice on the other end of the telephone line unmistakably belonged to our daughter. I didn't know how an unearthly hotel telephone had received her phone call, but it was hardly the thing which made the least sense in that upturned place. "Something's toying with us," I whispered, embracing my wife. "We need to find Malia and get out of here," Sydney said. I gingerly opened the door to reveal an empty corridor. Empty as far as the eye could see, anyway. But danger lurked in that infinite passage. We had learned that. And as we stepped outside, I caught the briefest flash of movement by an open door. "What was that?" Sydney cried. "Come on," I replied. We hurried to the open door, and I shakily prepared myself for another room of horrors. What I did not expect to find was another hallway. This one was different to the beige corridor. It was tiled and lacked garish fluorescent lights. Instead, it was scarcely lit by vending machines that lined its endless walls. The first few machines were empty, but Sydney and I stopped at the sight of a revolting red pool on the black diamond patterned tiles. My wife screamed. I didn't utter a sound. The shelves of the vending machine were overflowing with slabs of meat. There was a broad range of severed limbs, still donning blood-smeared flesh. "Let's keep moving," I muttered, attempting to remain composed for Sydney. "Careful on the wet tiles." As we continued to walk down the gloomy hallway, each vending machine told a tale of suffering. In one particular machine, a decapitated human head lay on its side, and its eyelids sprang open, unleashing faded pupils that erratically eyed us. We ran until our lungs wheezed, and then we kept running. I eventually noticed a change in the far distance. The limitless line of light seemed to have a limit after all. There was an end to the vending machines, an end to the hallway. But there was no light beyond that point of finality. The thought of total darkness, like the void from room 11's window, haunted me more than the unending corridor. There would be no way to see what was lurking ahead. The doorway led into the main lobby, which made no sense, given that we were on the 3rd floor of the hotel. "We're not really in the hotel," I reminded myself, "and nothing here makes sense." The space wasn't as wholly dark as it had seemed from a distance. It was faintly lit by kerosene lamps on the walls, which burned relentlessly. Still, they did very little to reveal our surroundings. And whilst the floor area of the room was finite, unlike the corridors we just traversed, the lobby walls climbed ceaselessly upwards. There was no visible ceiling, no staircase, no other floors, just an endless climb towards a place that couldn't be heaven. "We'll have to try those double doors," my wife said, nodding at the only exit from the darkened lobby. "We don't even know whether Malia..." A sinister sound interrupted Sydney's sentence. It came from the corridor of vending machines. It was the sound of a window scraper. Like everything else in that distorted dimension, it was menacingly mundane, a sound that nearly belonged to our world. My wife and I turned to face the source of the noise. A slinking spider-like creature with 4 razor-thin limbs was shooting towards us, a spectral bullet in a chamber. Illuminated vaguely by the faint glow of the machines it passed, I could see that it wore a purple suit on its inhuman body. The monstrous concierge of the hotel. Wailing wildly, Sydney and I ran for the doors at the far end of the lobby, barreling for the only escape route from the haunting being that pursued us. My wife trembled as she threw open the doors, revealing another dimly lit space. An endless space, of course. The hotel's kitchen. As we closed the double doors behind us, we caught one final glimpse of the spider-like monstrosity entering the lobby, scurrying towards us with its long limbs of terror. I grabbed a nearby broom and threaded it through the handles, praying that it would withstand the impact of the concierge. But no thud came. We could hear the creature charging for the doors, but its footsteps suddenly stopped. "Let's keep moving," I whispered to Sydney. More never-ending space. We passed countless countertops, and I started to wonder whether we would ever find our daughter. I certainly couldn't see us escaping that realm. "Evan, listen," Sydney said, gripping my arm. I heard it, a metallic banging, accompanied by a girl's scream for help. "Help! Help!" It was Malia's voice. "Wait, are we sure that's her?" I asked, terrified of the dimension's treacherous trickery. My wife shot a fearsome glare in my direction. "You didn't just say that." We kept running until we reached the sound, which was coming from the hotel's freezer. "Help! The door's stuck." "Open it, Evan," Sydney pleaded. I drew a deep breath, bracing for whatever awful abomination might be waiting to pounce. Sydney stepped back whilst I heaved the stiff door open, heart beating against my chest. "Malia," I gasped. There, shivering on the floor, was my petrified, teary daughter. She looked up at me with a childlike vulnerability that I hadn't seen in years. Her tough teenage facade had fallen by the wayside. She embraced me and sobbed. "What's happening, Dad? Where are we?" "I don't know," I whispered. "Let's get out of here." "Where's Mum?" Malia asked. We've reached the part of the story that I still struggle to put into words, even after all of these years. 10 years to be exact. My wife wasn't behind me. She'd vanished into the nothingness of the endless hotel, without so much as a whimper. And before I had a chance to suggest searching for Malia's mother, a sudden sound pierced my ears. A window scraper. The creature had found its way into the kitchen. I clutched my daughter, unsure of which way to run, but a deafening ding answered the question for me. It was the sound of lift doors opening, 100 yards or so to the left of us, and 100 yards to our right, there crept an insidious arachnid in a purple suit. "Run," I ordered. We hightailed to the lift doors, and I prayed that they would remain open. I didn't want to imagine what the spider creature would do if it were to catch us. When my daughter and I hurled ourselves into the lift, I smashed the only button on offer and held my breath as the doors slowly drew together. The concierge stretched one of its tentacle limbs towards the lift as the two doors met, but we were barricaded before the abomination could tear into us. Neither my daughter nor I said a word as the lift moved. We could have been travelling left, right, up or down. There were no directions in that world. All I know is that I feared what we would find on the other side of the doors. And when they finally parted, I certainly didn't expect to gaze upon the door to room 11. But that was exactly what happened. "How?" Malia asked. I soundlessly ushered my daughter out of the lift, sobbing at the disappearance of my wife. As if to answer that thought, I heard a whisper behind me. "I love you both." I turned hopefully, but that hope morphed into blood-curdling fear. My wife lingered in the mirror of the hotel lift. She was a disembodied spectre, caged in a glass pane, smiling at me with a white complexion and blood-stained clothes. The lights in the lift flickered, and she disappeared. "Dad?" Marlia asked. The lift doors closed, and I turned to face my daughter. She hadn't seen or heard her mother. Given the trauma of such a sight, I'm glad. Instead, she had been reading a post-it note on our door. "What does it say?" I asked. "Payments accepted," Marlia replied. We somberly entered the room, and I closed the 11th door behind us. The ground momentarily tilted beneath our feet, before straightening again. When I looked at my watch, the second hand was moving. Tentatively testing my hopeful hypothesis, I eased open the door. The corridor was a normal, finite length, and there was no ominous message on the wall. I heard a car honk outside, as if to confirm that we had returned to reality, and we turned to see the night sky out of our hotel window. It's been a decade, and we're not the same. I'm thankful for Marlia's safety, but I never stopped thinking about Sydney's phantom in that lift mirror. I never had closure. Can something as finite as death occur in the Infinite Hotel?